Mark Noseworthy and Luke Smith were working on Project Payback, which we've heard a lot about recently. The first time we heard about Project Payback was earlier this year when someone on Reddit leaked that Prismatic was a thing and correctly predicted it before it was released. And then in the same post also said that Destiny 3 is in development and it's called Project Payback. And they said in that post that it was Destiny 3. It's not a spin-off. It's not anything else. It's a full-on Destiny 3 that's being developed, and it's called Project Payback. So it's interesting because half of that is right and half of it is wrong, because it is, again, that they did accurately predict it is called Payback. So they knew something, and they obviously spoke to developers. But now we've heard that Project Payback wasn't Destiny 3. It was a separate spin-off that was somewhat first-person and somewhat third-person, and it was... apparently it was very good, but it was more like a kind of a Warframe Genshin type of game. And it uses the characters. So it was Destiny. It would use the Destiny characters in the franchise, exploring a large world, apparently co-op, battling monsters and solving puzzles, which actually sounded like really good. But it wasn't Destiny 3, but it was a spin-off. But it was like third-person, first-person elements. I guess it switches between the two. But that's now been cancelled. So that was Project Payback, which was a spin-off that Mark and Luke were working on. And but what's even more crazy is that they've obviously left the company. I don't think they were laid off. I think it was more that, they shut down the project, and then Mark and Luke were like, okay, so the thing we're working on is no longer. We now have a choice of, we can go continue working on Destiny 2, which I don't think any of them really wanted to. I think they're probably like done with Destiny, especially Destiny 2. They've been working on Destiny for like more than a decade at this point, so I don't think they have interest in going backwards to Destiny 2. And there might not have been a role for them. Maybe it would have been a pay cut, because there probably isn't a position, because they're senior directors and developers. I don't think there would have been a role for them in Destiny 2 or Marathon, which again, similar. Maybe all the roles are filled. Maybe they didn't want to work on Marathon. So it wasn't so much that they were laid off. It's more that they just didn't see that there wasn't a role for them in the company, and they probably chose to leave. I don't think they would have been, I don't think they would have been fired or like let go. But they probably decided themselves that this isn't really what we want. And obviously they're very, very capable people. And obviously I'm sure they've been paid well. So they would probably rather maybe start their own studio or work for someone else. And but that is very, very big. The fact that Luke Smith is, because he's always been, and even the crazy part is that right before Final Shape, he was, of course, in that Vidoc. In the very beginning, he did a specific message saying like, hey, Destiny... we're still working on Beyond Destiny. I forget the exact words, but he said Destiny isn't going anywhere.
Destiny 2 isn't going anywhere. We'll tell you more about what happens after Final Shape when the Witness and the battle with it is concluded. And we'll tell you more about what's happening in Destiny 2 and beyond. Yeah. And honestly, I'll say this as well. The internal messaging of Bungie was spot on when that moment happened, because that's the reputation of Luke Smith, and to a certain extent as well, Mark Noseworthy. These have been the stewards of Destiny as a franchise since The Taken King, which is considered the first high point in Destiny, where, it was the first moment at which people would really gravitate towards it and where people would latch on. This is a fundamentally important figure in Destiny's history, because he represents the good times and the strong expansions that have come out and really defined Destiny. When they sat there and said that Final Shape needs to exemplify Witch Queen, Taken King, and Forsaken, they knew what they were talking about, and that's why Luke Smith was up there in the front. To see him leave, I mean, there's no other way to describe it other than crushing. He was that. This is the guy who, when Destiny 2 was first getting announced, was one of the first people on stage at the Destiny 2 reveal event. Him being attached to Project Payback tells you all you need to know about Payback, which was that it was a serious project. And I think, for what it's worth, I know people have been back and forth about the direction of everything, but no one internally said that Payback was looking like it was in a bad state.
Yeah.
I think the important thing to remember as well is that when you're going for this different kind of game, you can make a much more sort of, it might be a bit nebulous to describe it as a tighter experience, but think of it from the perspective of what they were describing versus Destiny. Destiny has an enormous pile of loot. You as a main unnamed protagonist who occasionally speaks, but for the most part has to be silent so you can kind of imprint what you think onto that character. And if you take this alternative direction where it's all known characters, you get to interact with them, you have this set series of powers, all of a sudden you get the ability to craft tighter gameplay scenarios, different narratives that are more focused on those individuals. It could really have worked, and I would have loved to have seen what they would have done with it, especially on the basis of what you were fighting. Solving puzzles and fighting big monsters? I mean, you know, Destiny, sure, occasionally you just have a Hive Ogre or a Vex Hydra or whatever, but Destiny has no shortage of big monsters when you really think about it. The Ahamkara alone are an entire expansion for a game like that. You know, you sit down and you're like, okay, the Great Hunt is happening. All of a sudden, you have an entire series of dragon hunts you're going on. It's a game like that could well have worked. And I'm gutted to hear that something like this has been cancelled over everything else. It's also, I'll go back to something you said originally with this, which is that it's really strange to me, the part of that which the original leaker got wrong, which is that Payback was actually not ever Destiny 3, right? You'd think that that would have been the most salient detail with regards to something like that, because you would imagine that would be something you could have been able to confirm immediately, right? Even if you were just looking at this from internal rumors and whatnot. It's so strange that that thing was labeled as Destiny 3 and yet it's not Destiny 3, right?
Although they did, in their defense, they did say like was/is, and they did say that they got that information last summer, or maybe, or I guess the Bungie developer that they had spoken to, their information was from around the Final Shape reveal of last summer. So they said it could have been out of date and things could change. But they did then make a separate Reddit post saying Destiny 3, literally saying Destiny 3 is Destiny 3, not a spin-off, not something else. It is Destiny 3. So like they did say the information is old, things could have changed, but it is Destiny 3. So I do think at the time the information was accurate. I do think at the time they would have been working on something like Destiny 3, but as we know, things do change. Things change all the time. Things that cancelled, you know, Bungie just decides to lay off 30% of their company. Like things clearly move at a very rapid pace. So I do think at the time, the original source of the information, the Bungie developer or developers, it probably was Destiny 3, or maybe they were just told it was Destiny 3, but maybe at some point then it kind of got transformed into a bit more of a different project. They did also say at the time, which now makes more sense, they did say that they're going to get rid of classes. So no Titan, Hunter, and Warlock. It'll just be... Right. And that makes a lot of sense. With this new third-person adventure, just different game, that does make sense that you'd be playing as just Saladin or Shaxx or Akora, and you're just running around just doing so. And that would make sense. Obviously, still, you know, these characters are technically... they have classes, but they just have abilities. So that makes perfect sense now, the whole thing about... And again, like, this original leaker... we all know that they're telling the truth even more. Like their information has been proved more and more credible. Them saying this game Payback is not going to have classes, now we can understand exactly why this spin-off game wouldn't have had classes. But it isn't Destiny 3. That's the main difference. But it doesn't really change much of the information. But obviously now things have changed. But on top of that, you know, yeah, like I fully agree. I'm pretty sad about Payback in particular, because honestly, like it doesn't even have to be Destiny 3, but a game like Payback, I think that would have been enough. That would have been just, you know, it's still Bungie. They would have had top tier sound design and visuals and just graphics, gunplay, everything they've learned about Destiny, a loot system. I'm sure there would have been heavy microtransactions and monetization. They even said, Jason Trier even said it was similar to Warframe in Genshin. And I don't know a ton about it. I haven't played Genshin, but I know a lot about it and the whole, like, you know, monetization system
of pulls and whatnot.
So I'm sure they definitely planned it as a way to make a ton of money, because, you know, those games make a ton of money. So I'm sure that would have been a good motivation to do it. It probably wouldn't have required as much investment, probably not as much cutscenes and like deep story and so much as Destiny 1, 2, or 3, but I think, Payback would have been just, from the sounds of it, just like a fun Destiny game, still in the Destiny universe, Destiny characters, but hopefully not as much of an investment, and it could have come out quicker. But it does make me sad that that's not coming out, because I think that would have been, honestly, exactly what the game needs. Just a brand new, fresh start, a new gameplay loop, and not just another, couple of Destiny episodes, which, as good as they might be, they're still the same thing. Just something new, which is what people want with Destiny 3, something new. And this sounds like it would have been that.
And I think this is the other thing as well. You've got to remember that when it comes to a big franchise of any kind, I mean, just to take one that is way beyond the realms of most things in gaming, look at Star Wars, right? There is no single Star Wars game that truly defines things. There are absolutely contenders for standout games that can be considered iconic, Knights of the Old Republic, Republic Commando, I'd say more recently Jedi Survivor, all of these games that do stand out, but they exist within the universe of Star Wars, and each of those games that I've mentioned is technically a completely different genre and a different style of gameplay. Like, the closest thing that KOTOR and Jedi Survivor share is that they're third person, but one of them is more of an intense action combat and the other is turn-based and very much narrative driven. The point being that big franchises keep things fresh with different approaches to the universe that make things feel different. And whilst I think there would have been eventually a room for a Destiny 3, and I think that's kind of where things need to go now, I still think that having the ability to keep a franchise and just expand it into fresh new directions is what's also really important. It keeps things in the room lively, and this is what it would have done.